Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chris Hockenvoll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Normally I'd say it's a pleasure to follow Brendan Horan as a Speaker, but I'm afraid it really, well, no, it's not quite that simple either, Mr. Pafoy, because the reality is that he wasted an awful lot of his speech dealing with minutiae, dealing with personal difficulties that he has with other members of Parliament, and very little concentration on the bill. Indeed, it's quite interesting, Mr. Speaker. It is interesting to hear the expressions of commitment that people have to the environment when something has gone wrong. I would have thought it more beneficial to the public and to this House and to the level of debate to concentrate on what the bill will do. But people are permitted to say what their connection with the environment is. But they should realise, perhaps, not a criticism of Mr. Griffiths, not a criticism at all, but they should perhaps realise that others have an association with the, Gareth Hughes, with the marine environment as well. Indeed, a lot of my years of early life were spent in being an oyster farmer in Hokianga. And you're very conscious of the purity of water and the need for that sort of thing. But so much concentration has been given to the tragic event of the Rena that I'm not sure exactly what people think legislation can do. No law that I'm aware of can give absolute protection against accident, against marine breakdown, against human failings in officers and crew. Much has been made that this legislation could have been introduced at an earlier period. Well, if you look at the legislation we pass, I would have thought that that applies to most legislation. Generally, we follow behind the requirement rather than in anticipation of the need. When we do that, I notice this government comes in for a lot of criticism. Just think about that, just dwell on it a little. It said that this bill could have been introduced as soon as we became the government. Well, if it was that close, I reflect the view of my colleague, Mr. Jamie Lee Ross. Why couldn't it have been done a little earlier? Why is it now, after an awful event, suddenly a requirement that it should have been done earlier? Why wasn't it introduced by the previous government? I don't think, Mr. Speaker, we are going to be told that. I don't think we're going to be told. But I do encourage the members opposite to reflect on their criticism of our not having legislation in place to deal with events that may not have happened in the past, but introduce legislation so that they can cope with events when they do happen. Reflect back to Q&A on Sunday when our Minister of Internal Affairs was talking about legislation that could be introduced to process large numbers of people who haven't arrived yet. Will we be criticised for that? I guarantee we will. But perhaps opposition members will think about things a little in the light of their response and reaction to this particular bill not having been introduced earlier. These changes that are going to be introduced show that National is committed to building a more competitive and productive economy with a commitment and a balance between strong, sensible legislation and effectiveness towards the environment. It provides certainty around the laws that are involved, as well as improving safety, enforcement practices and the environmental protection. The main provisions of this bill, Mr. Speaker, rarely touched on in speeches so far from the other side of the House. The marine legislation makes amendments to the MTA and the EEZ Acts, including changes to the oversight of port, harbour and navigation safety. Well, I'm sure you did. Actually, I heard that your speech was one of the better ones. But I'm sorry, but on that score, it doesn't say a lot, Phil. It doesn't say a lot. But I did hear it was one of the better ones. It concentrated on the bill, on things like implementing the International Maritime Conventions and Protocols, a really good idea, in changes relating to the making of maritime and marine protection rules, transferring the regulation of the discharge and dumping of waste. Our safety procedures in our ports and harbours, Mr. Speaker, will always need improvement towards state of the art. They're expensive pieces of infrastructure. Amendments will give clear authority for Maritime New Zealand to take action in situations where port management poses a significant risk to the safety of shipping and of the marine environment. This will reinforce the important role of regional councils, harbour masters and maintaining maritime safety. Mr. Speaker, this is a useful piece of legislation. It is incorporating changes to other legislation. That too is a good thing. I can't see why members on the other side of the House are getting quite so upset. They should be pleased. They should, in the words of one of my earlier colleagues who spoke earlier, they should be pleased. They should say, well done, National. And I know, in their heart of hearts, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to do. They're smiling nicely because they know this is a useful piece of legislation. They're smiling nicely because they know they can give us a little bit of stick, but we've done what you guys should have done. We've done it now. We're facing up to it. We're meeting the requirement. You are basically pleased. You will join us in voting for this bill. I would hope that New Zealand First will join us in voting for this bill. I would hope that the Greens and all the other parties will, because there is no danger in it, there's no harm in it, it's a good bill, and I commend it to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by praising the